Take a look at this scene from Christopher Nolan's 2017 war film Dunkirk. There's no dialogue, nothing to explain what's going on, just a pilot glancing down at his instrument panel, glancing up at his mirror, several long seconds of waiting, a feeling of tension and expectation, and then finally the music swells as he throws his aircraft into a steep turn. Now, at first glance, it may not seem like much, but this moment is actually the key turning point, pun definitely intended, in the entire film. After all, it's only because the pilot, Farrier, turns his plane around here that he's able later on to shoot down the German bomber in the film's climactic scene, in which all three storylines that we've been following come together in one epic moment. The turning scene also leads directly to this gorgeously shot montage at the end of the film, in which Farrier has to glide his plane in for a landing on a deserted beach before being taken captive by German soldiers. But the point I want to make is that the importance of the turning scene only becomes obvious when you view the film for a second time. The first time through, the scene is just a scene. It's nice and all, but it doesn't hit very hard. But now that I've seen the film a few times, this scene is easily one of my favorites. So little happens, and yet so much is going on. You can see the agony in his eyes as he wrestles with this choice, and then watch as that agony slowly hardens into a sense of resolve. And that's when it hits you. He's not just turning his plane around, he's sacrificing himself, laying down his life for the men in the water, knowing that he doesn't have enough fuel to come back, and that even if he succeeds in taking out the bomber, he's got nowhere to go but down. And when we see him led away into captivity at the end of the film, we finally understand the full cost of this moment, and the weight of it really sinks in. I start with that scene today because it illustrates something crucial about storytelling, particularly as it relates to film, and that is that in order to get the most out of a film, you really do have to watch it more than once. When you think about it, movies often represent millions of hours of work from thousands of cast and crew, from costume designers and set decorators to writers, animators, editors, and more. And all of that work gets packed into a final product that usually clocks in somewhere around the 2-hour mark. That's a ton of work condensed into a pretty small running time, so it stands to reason that there's a lot packed in there, and lots of it only becomes visible the second or third time around. So the point of today's episode is this. If you've only seen a movie once, you really haven't seen the movie. Most films require 2 or 3 viewings at minimum before you can really start to understand what's going on in a meaningful way. Unless it's a Michael Bay film, in which case, no. Now, to illustrate this idea, I want to look at a lesser-known film that came out a few years ago called Leave No Trace, co-written and directed by Deborah Granick. It's a simple but unexpectedly powerful story about a father and his teenage daughter, Tom, who live together illegally off the grid in the national park. When we first meet them, their lives are peaceful, contented, and entirely consumed with the everyday acts of survival. But when their camp is discovered by the authorities, they're forced into a physical and emotional journey that tests their relationship to the limit. Now, I don't want to give too much away, but when it comes to the power of rewatching a film, this one is a gift that keeps on giving on so many levels. And today we're going to look at just 2 of those levels, cinematography and metaphor. To start with, cinematography refers to the way in which a director uses the camera to tell the story visually without words. When it comes to the camera work in Leave No Trace, there are a couple of key moments that only really hit you once you've seen the film at least twice. Take this scene near the beginning of the film, when the main characters are first discovered by the authorities. Tom, the daughter, stands on the left side of the screen, while the social worker who's there to apprehend her stands further down on the right. Notice the giant tree trunk that divides the shot neatly in 2. It's pretty clear that the director is trying to show us something here, namely that there's a huge barrier between these 2 characters. They live in worlds that are completely separate from each other, and bridging that gap is not something that's going to happen anytime soon. Fast forward to a later scene when Tom and her dad have been forcibly resettled into a new house on the outskirts of the city. At first, they're both completely out of their element and don't know what to do with themselves, but Tom quickly begins to adapt and settle into her new environment, forming a connection with the boy who lives nearby, and starting to adjust to the rhythms of, quote, normal life with human relationship. This leads to the first moment of tension between father and daughter, as they disagree about whether or not they should stay and try to stick it out in their new surroundings, or strike out into the woods again. Tom's dad clearly isn't ready for this kind of suburban life yet, but Tom wants to stay and give it a shot. Now, notice how this shot is almost a mirror image of the one we just saw, but much more subtle. Tom and her dad are having a standoff, facing each other across the living room, with the lamp serving as the barrier between them. It doesn't cut the frame in half completely like the tree did earlier, but nonetheless it's the first indication that something's coming between them, and that all is not well in their relationship. And small moments like this often get lost in that first viewing. You sometimes need to watch the movie again to really notice them. Another place where the power of the cinematography stands out much better on a second viewing is the striking difference between how some of the film's outdoor scenes are shot. In the film's opening, when we first meet Tom and her dad, they're content and at peace in the woods, and the cinematography reflects this. The dominant colors are green and yellow, which make us feel safe, and the camera puts us right in there amongst the trees and undergrowth, making us feel at home. But contrast this with a later scene, in which Tom and her dad have left their house behind, and have made their way back into the woods again, very much against Tom's wishes. This time, notice how the trees are shot from below to make them look huge and intimidating, and the warm greens and yellows from before have been replaced with grays and blues, making us feel cold and uncomfortable. The message is clear. The woods might have been Tom's home once, but no longer. Now they're a frightening alien landscape, full of darkness and danger. We don't need to hear the characters say anything in order to get the message. In fact, if they did say something, it would just cheapen the moment. Finally, metaphor refers to a situation in which something is used to stand as a symbol for something else. Often a physical object is made to represent a deeper, invisible reality.
A metaphor.
Leave No Trace includes at least a couple of really great metaphors, but the one I want to focus on appears about halfway through the film, at the part of the story where Tom and her dad are being made to live in the house. As part of their resettlement, the dad is given a job helping out on a Christmas tree farm. His job is to shape the trees by pruning them until they look good enough to be sent off to stores. Now, the first time through the film, this may not really seem that significant, but on repeated viewings, once the themes of the film have really had time to sink in, we can see that there's a whole lot more to this scene than meets the eye. After all, the whole purpose of this tree farm is to take trees that are wild and tame them, civilize them, until they meet the expectations and standards of polite society. In other words, exactly what the government is trying to do with Tom and her dad. What's happening to the trees is really happening to them. And what makes it powerful is that we're not told how we should feel about it. We're simply allowed to observe it, reflect on it, and come to our own conclusions. And it's these opportunities for reflection that we often miss out on when we only watch a movie once. In many ways, the entertainment of our day and age is defined by glancing and scrolling. We become used to looking at something for just a few seconds before moving on to the next thing. This might be fun at times, but it's probably not very good for our brains, and it's certainly causing us to miss out on the richness of some of the stories that we're being presented with. I'm not saying that every movie deserves to be watched multiple times, or even once for that matter, but when a story is well crafted and meaningful, it's worthwhile to return to it to see what you might have missed the first time. After all, the best works of art and literature are like a gold mine. They've got so many riches to offer, but you're not going to get them by staying on the surface. Thanks for watching.